April 12, 1963, Atlanta, Georgia. Walter Wright adjusted his tie in the bathroom mirror of the Coca-Cola headquarters. At 32, he embodied what many considered the American dream. Korean War veteran, chemistry degree from Georgia Tech, and now 5 years into a promising career at America's most iconic company. As a quality control supervisor, Walter took pride in safeguarding the world's most famous secret formula. He smoothed down his short-cropped hair, checked his watch, a gift from his father upon his return from Korea, and headed to the weekly department meeting. Walter's life was defined by routine and reliability. His colleagues often joked that you could set your clock by Walter's schedule, arriving precisely at 8 a.m., lunch at noon, and never leaving until 5:15 p.m. "Morning, Walter," called Dorothy Lambert from her desk as he passed. The new secretary had started 3 months ago, with her striking auburn hair and quick smile. Unlike most of the other secretaries, Dorothy asked questions about the company's processes that went beyond simple curiosity. Walter found her interest refreshing. "Morning, Dorothy. Coffee ready yet?" he asked, pausing by her desk. "Just finished brewing. I've already put the report copies on your chair for the meeting." Walter nodded appreciatively. "You're a lifesaver." The meeting proceeded like dozens before it: production quotas, quality assurance protocols, and the endless discussion of the company's international expansion. Coca-Cola was becoming more than a beverage. It was becoming a symbol of America itself. "And finally," said Howard Parker, the department head, "we have the upcoming visit from our bottling partners in Vienna. Walter, I'd like you to head the tour of the technical facilities." Walter nodded, making a note in his leather-bound planner. Vienna meant the company's new foothold behind the Iron Curtain, a commercial victory in the Cold War that executives spoke about with barely contained pride. Back at his office, Walter noticed Dorothy lingering near his file cabinet. She startled slightly when he entered. "Sorry," she said with an embarrassed smile. "Mr. Parker asked me to pull the Vienna facility specifications, but I wasn't sure which folder." "That's fine," Walter said. "But those would be in the international division. I can show you later." He thought nothing more of it until 2 days later, when he noticed his desk drawer slightly ajar. Walter was methodical to a fault, a trait his ex-wife had found maddening but made him excellent at his job. He never left drawers open, not even by a quarter-inch. Inside, his files appeared untouched, but something felt wrong. He carefully examined each folder until he found it. The test reports on the new formula adaptation for European markets were out of sequence. Someone had gone through his files. That evening, instead of heading home to his modest apartment in Buckhead, Walter drove to a payphone several blocks away. He dialed a number he had memorized years ago but never used. "Anderson Insurance," answered a clipped voice. Walter hesitated, then spoke the words he'd been trained to say if he ever noticed anything suspicious. "I'd like to inquire about coverage for a 1957 Thunderbird. My policy number is Alpha 972. Please hold." There was a click. Then a new voice came on the line. "Go ahead. This is Wright. I work at Coca-Cola headquarters in Atlanta. I believe there may be a security situation." 2 days later, Walter sat across from FBI agent Frank Miller in a nondescript hotel room 10 miles from the Coca-Cola campus. "Tell me about this secretary," Miller said, his government-issue suit as gray as his expression. "Dorothy Lambert. Started in January. Early 30s. Says she's from Chicago originally. Divorced. No children." Miller nodded, making notes. "And the suspicious activity? Someone's been going through my files. Specifically, information about our formula adaptations and the Vienna facility. Nothing's missing, just examined. Could be industrial espionage. Pepsi would love to know your secrets," Miller suggested. Walter shook his head. "It's not just the formula. Its shipping routes, facility layouts, security protocols. Miller's expression changed subtly. The Soviets have been stepping up commercial intelligence gathering. Khrushchev is desperate to show their system can match ours economically. What do you need me to do? Walter asked. Nothing changes for now. Go about your routine. We'll look into Ms. Lambert. If she's involved, we need to know who she's working with. For the next week, Walter maintained his schedule with military precision, all while noticing things he'd previously overlooked. Dorothy taking late lunches on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Her casual questions about which executives would be touring the Vienna facility. The small Leica camera he glimpsed once in her purse. On Friday, Agent Miller contacted him again. "We've found some discrepancies in her background. Dorothy Lambert from Chicago died in 1949 at age 4. Your Dorothy Lambert's apartment has a shortwave radio hidden in a false bottom of her dresser. We need more, though. Proof of her activities. The Vienna delegation arrives Monday," Walter said. "If she's going to make a move, it'll be before then." The plan was simple but risky. Walter would leave falsified Vienna facility documents in his desk. Documents that contained subtle errors that would identify any copies. Then he would leave for the weekend while FBI surveillance watched who accessed his office. What they didn't anticipate was Dorothy's boldness. At 11:30 p.m. on Saturday, security cameras captured her entering the building with her legitimate employee badge. The night watchman, accustomed to her friendly demeanor and occasional weekend work, barely gave her a second glance. By Monday morning, Walter arrived to find his desk apparently untouched. But the trap had worked. The microfilm dot under the corner of his blotter was missing. "She took the bait," Miller confirmed when Walter called from the designated payphone. "But we need to catch her passing the information. That's the only way to identify her handler." "The Vienna delegation tour is tomorrow," Walter said. "If she's going to pass anything, it'll be then. We'll have agents in place, but they can't be obvious. These Soviet operatives are well trained to spot surveillance." That night, Walter barely slept. He joined Coca-Cola after his military service looking for normalcy, for the peaceful life that had been promised to his generation after World War II. Now he found himself in the middle of the shadow war that defined the era. Tuesday arrived with dreary spring rain. The Austrian delegation, 3 executives and their interpreter, were scheduled for a full-day tour culminating in a dinner at the executive dining room. Walter led them methodically through the production facilities, explaining quality control measures and the specialized equipment used to maintain consistency across international markets. Dorothy accompanied the group as the designated secretary, taking notes and distributing information packets. Walter noticed her particular attention to Dieter Hoffmann, the interpreter, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and impeccable English. During the lunch break, Walter observed Dorothy excuse herself to use the restroom. 7 minutes later, Hoffmann did the same. Neither action would have seemed suspicious to anyone not watching for it. When they returned, Walter noted that Dorothy's handbag hung differently on her arm, slightly lighter. Hoffmann's jacket pocket bulged slightly where it had been flat before. The tour continued through the afternoon. At 4:30, the delegation moved to the executive conference room for final discussions before dinner. As they settled in, Walter excused himself and hurried to the designated meeting point where Agent Miller waited. "It's the interpreter, Hoffmann. They made an exchange." Miller nodded grimly. "We've been tracking Hoffmann for months. He's traveled with 3 different Austrian trade delegations to American companies. If we can catch him with the microfilm, we can roll up their entire network. What do you need me to do?" "Keep the tour on schedule. We'll handle the rest." The dinner proceeded with practiced corporate hospitality. Toasts were made to international cooperation and the success of Coca-Cola in Austria. Throughout, Walter maintained his composure despite the knowledge that FBI agents were positioning themselves throughout the building. At 8:45 p.m., as coffee was being served, Hoffman excused himself to make a phone call. 3 minutes later, the maitre d' approached Walter. "Mr. Wright, there's an urgent call for you at the reception desk." In the hallway, Miller waited instead of a phone. "We're moving now. Hoffman's heading for the parking garage. We believe he's making a brush pass to his Soviet contact." They hurried downstairs, taking a service elevator to avoid being seen. In the dimly lit parking garage, Miller directed Walter to stay back as he and 2 other agents moved forward silently. The sudden screech of tires echoed through the concrete structure as a dark sedan accelerated toward the exit. Miller sprinted forward, gun drawn, shouting, "FBI! Stop the vehicle!" The car swerved, clipping a concrete pillar before skidding to a halt. Agents surrounded it, yanking open the driver's door to reveal Hoffman, wide-eyed and panicked. The search of his person yielded the microfilm, hidden in a specially designed cigarette case. More damning was the Soviet diplomatic identification concealed in a hidden pocket of his briefcase. Dieter Hoffman was actually Dmitry Kazanov, a KGB officer working under diplomatic cover. As Hoffman was handcuffed and led away, Walter stood in the shadows of the parking garage, the rain outside casting moving patterns on the concrete floor. "What about Dorothy?" he asked when Miller returned. "We're picking her up now. Her real name is Daria Lenskaya. Soviet illegal. Been in the country for almost 5 years establishing her cover." Walter felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp spring air. She seemed so normal. Miller nodded sympathetically. "That's what makes them dangerous. The best spies are the ones you'd never suspect." The aftermath unfolded over weeks. Dorothy Daria was arrested at her apartment that night. The evidence was overwhelming. Coded radio equipment, false-bottomed suitcases containing alternate identities, and photography equipment for document reproduction. Walter was questioned extensively by FBI counterintelligence, recounting every interaction, every conversation. The Bureau determined that the operation had been targeting not just Coca-Cola's formula, but its international shipping and distribution networks, infrastructure the Soviets could study and replicate. 3 months later, Walter was called to Washington. In a small ceremony at FBI headquarters, he received a commendation he could never publicly acknowledge. J. Edgar Hoover himself shook his hand with a tight smile. "Your vigilance protected not just company secrets, Mr. Wright, but contributed to the security of the nation," Hoover said for the benefit of the photographers. Afterward, in a private conversation, a senior counterintelligence official explained the broader impact. "The network we rolled up based on Hoffman's capture included Soviet assets in 3 other American companies. You helped stop a major industrial espionage operation." Walter returned to Atlanta and his job at Coca-Cola. The company's executives were briefed on the situation, but the story never reached the press. Dorothy Lambert simply disappeared from the office, her departure explained as a family emergency requiring her return to Chicago. The Vienna facility opened on schedule. Walter continued his work, his routine apparently unchanged. But he never again left his desk unlocked, never again took for granted the simplicity of his world. He had glimpsed the shadow war beneath the surface of American life, a war fought not with armies but with secrets, fought by people who looked just like everyone else. October 12, 1989, Atlanta. Walter Wright, now retired from Coca-Cola for 5 years, sat in his living room watching the evening news. The Berlin Wall was coming down. Young Germans with hammers and chisels were dismantling the physical embodiment of the Iron Curtain while the world watched in amazement. The doorbell rang. On his porch stood a man in his 50s, trim and professional in a government-issue suit. "Mr. Wright, my name is Thomas Keller, State Department." He showed identification. "May I come in?" Inside, Keller got directly to the point. "The Cold War is ending, Mr. Wright. Many records are being unsealed. Many prisoners exchanged." Walter felt a tightening in his chest. "Dorothy Lambert." Keller nodded. "Daria Lenskaya was sentenced to 30 years. She's being released in a prisoner exchange next month. Before that happens, she's requested to speak with you. Just once." "Why would I agree to that?" "She claims to have information about your time in Korea. Things you might want to know." Walter's hand trembled slightly as he set down his coffee mug. His 3 months as a POW in North Korea had left scars deeper than the visible ones on his left shoulder. 2 weeks later, Walter sat in a sterile room at the federal penitentiary in Kentucky. The woman who entered, escorted by guards, was thinner than he remembered. Her once auburn hair now gray and cut short. Only her eyes remained the same, alert, intelligent, assessing. They sat in silence for nearly a minute, studying each other across 26 years of history. "You look well, Walter," she said finally, her accent now unmistakably Russian. "You wanted to see me," he replied, his voice steady. "The State Department said you had information." She nodded slowly. "I knew you in Korea before Atlanta. Not personally, but your file. I was stationed in Pyongyang as a translator when you were captured. I read your interrogation transcripts." Walter's mouth went dry. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you should know. The names of the other soldiers you gave them under torture? They were never acted upon. I buried that part of the report. Those men and their families remained safe." Walter stared at her, the old shame he had carried for decades suddenly exposed. He had broken under torture, given names, locations. It had haunted him through nightmares and failed marriages. "Why would you do that?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Daria looked down at her hands, the first time her gaze had wavered. "Because even in war, there are moments of humanity. What they did to you." She paused. "I made a choice. And then you spent years spying on my country. Yes, just as you spent years working against mine. We were soldiers on different sides, Walter. Nothing more, nothing less." The guards signaled that their time was ending. "I'm going home to a country that barely resembles the one I left," she said, rising. "Everything I believed in is collapsing. Was any of it worth the cost? I don't know anymore." As she turned to leave, Walter found his voice again. "The day you were arrested, did you know it was me who discovered you?" She looked back, a sad smile touching her lips. "Of course. You were too methodical, too precise. The moment I saw your drawer had been reset to exactly the right position, I knew you had caught me. A millimeter's difference, but it was enough. In another world, you would have made an excellent agent yourself." After she was gone, Walter sat alone in the interview room for a long time. Outside, the world was changing, alliances shifting, walls falling. But some secrets would remain buried. Some wars never truly end. The shadow conflict that had defined their lives would be relegated to history books that would tell only partial truths. Walter Wright returned home to Atlanta, to his quiet retirement and weekly letters from his son in California. He tucked away the memories of Dorothy Lambert, Daria Lenskaya, alongside those of Korea and all the other battles fought in silence. In his desk drawer, he kept the letter she had given the guard to pass to him as she left. It contained only one sentence, written in careful English. "In the game of secrets, there are no true victories, only varying degrees of loss." He never showed it to anyone, never spoke of their final meeting. Some secrets, he had learned, were meant to stay buried. Even as the Cold War faded into history, its shadows remained, cast long across the lives of those who had fought its quietest battles.